I'm going to talk to you about social media and responsive images. So I'll talk about color, file types, responsive images and responsive web design, and social media and images for social media. So we'll talk about color. We work in RGB for screen, not CMYK, which is for print. And we talk about our colors as hexadecimal numbers, or letters and numbers, a hexadecimal. So there's 6 letters, or letters and number combination, that describe the red, green, and the blue. So the first 2 are for red, the second 2 are for green, and the third 2 are for blue. So we can see that our pink here is a combination of FAB1C2. You can also specify as RGB, so 250, 177, 194 for this pink, but that's just less common in the web. Since you're working with people's screens and their computers, the color will be affected when they look at your imagery. So things like the quality of their computer, their monitor, or their settings that they have for their screen. And you need to think about good contrast. So people have a lot of different abilities with vision, and some people can't see very low contrast images. So for example, you wouldn't put light gray text on a medium gray background. That's a little bit too low contrast. So you're looking for something with a higher contrast. In your various software programs, so for Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, you can find the hexadecimal number generally at the bottom of the color picker. For your color settings, you want sRGB, which stands for Standard RGB, because screens and browsers particularly are built for the sRGB color space. That means when you are converting a file from CMYK to RGB, you may see a shift in colors. So you'll need to take a look. The software will sort of automatically do that shift in colors for you, but you need to decide if the shift that the software has made is correct. You're smarter than your software. You might not see any change, but if you do, then you should adjust for the RGB color space. So in Photoshop, Illustrator, and InDesign, if you go to the Edit menu and then Color Settings, you can ensure that your RGB is sRGB. So file types. Screen is pixel-based. So we'll be looking at pixel-based and raster images. So you can use GIF, JPEG, and PNG for screen and for web, but not TIFF. TIFF is for print only. So TIFF will not work on websites, they won't work in your social media. And as well for vector images, SVG. So for file resolution, it's different for screen than for print. So for print, we're looking at actually applying ink to a page. So often our standard resolution is 300 dpi, or dots per inch. Our common setting for screen and websites is 72 ppi, or pixels per inch. It actually doesn't matter what your resolution is, so that's 72 ppi. It could be 300, it could be 200. It doesn't actually matter for screen. 72 is just sort of the standard that we've fallen into or selected over time, because your PPI can't be 0 or 1, it needs to be something, and 72 is the standard that is used across the web. What you really care about is the number of pixels in your file. So how large is the file? So for example, 100 by 100 pixel file has a lower resolution than a 200 by 200 pixel image because there's simply fewer pixels to put on the screen. So for example, Retina screens, you need to make files twice as big as you would for older screens, that are from computers that are back from like 2010. In our current age when we have Retina and 4K displays, those displays can jam more pixels into a smaller space. So if you have an image that's, say, 1200 by 1200, looking at an older screen at 72 ppi, it will show up fine. But when you look at it in a Retina screen, you need to basically half the size of it. So put that 1200 by 1200 pixel image into a 600 by 600 pixel space. The pixels will become more dense, and it'll look really sharp on the Retina screen. And as always, these things sort of depend on the user's screen or the projector and its resolution. So as I said, older screens show lower resolution. Retina and higher screens show more resolution, so you need larger images for that. For the social media images, you don't really have to worry about this because they specify what images to give to them, and then those specifications account for screens with higher ability to show, a sharper, Retina-style image. So just looking at different types of graphics or graphic files, file types, so GIF is an older file type. We used it for things with sort of defined lines, so for like line art like logos. It achieves a really small size. And it's a lossless file format, so it doesn't degrade with image quality. The compression doesn't degrade it. And it contains a maximum of 256 colors. What we really use it nowadays for is animated GIFs. Everyone loves those. So not a very common file format nowadays, except for animated GIF. For JPEGs, they're good for images that have continuous color, so gradients and photographs. They use a compression algorithm that strikes the balance between quality and file size. And it's a lossy file format, so compression degrades the image quality. So when you're working with GIF, every time that you save it and then open it again and then make some changes and save it again and so on and so on, you're losing data each time you're doing that. So you should always work from the original. Always keep a copy of the original around. Can display millions of colors, and as I said, good for photos and images with continuous color. PNG. So PNG is basically taken over the space that GIF used to have. And one of the reasons is that GIF is a proprietary file format, so people had to pay licenses to be able to export for GIF. So Adobe and Photoshop would pay to be able to export as GIF, but PNG is open, which means you don't have to pay for a proprietary license, and the internet likes that kind of stuff. So great for line art like logos, just like GIF. Great for or it has transparency as well as one of its things, just like GIF. And it can do continuous color and photographs just like JPEG. However, with JPEG, or compared to JPEG, PNG files tend to be much larger. So if you are working with images that are photos or with gradients, JPEG is recommended just so that you have a smaller file size. And that matters to users because, for example, if you're using a phone and you have a data plan, downloading large files eats up the data plan. And also, if you have a slow connection, it's slow to download large files. For PNG, it, again, just like JPEG, can display millions of colors. It's really good at transparency, like GIF, but not a replacement for JPEG because file sizes tend to be larger. For SVG, it's scalable, so it's vector. So as opposed to pixel-based file types such as JPEG and PNG, so flexible for scaling and zooming. And basically it uses code to be able to render it, so just like in your Illustrator files, and it allows for transparency. You'll find with your social media files that, Facebook and Instagram and whatnot, they don't allow SVG, so this is more information for designing for web. So talking about responsive web design, which is abbreviated to RWD. So the layout reconfigures based on the browser and device. So for example, desktop, laptop, tablet, or phone. So on desktop, you have the ability to resize your browser, same with laptop, and then tablet and phone. Those browsers are sized to the device, and then depending on whether you're holding it vertically or horizontally. So for example, for the U of A website, if I bring it in to look a bit smaller, so closer to phone, just going to bring that out again. We can look at the differences. So we have navigation along the top, horizontal, and some more navigation all along the top here. We have a large image for a feature area. And then we have some information as 3 columns, and then a 2-column area, another 3-column area, and so forth. If we look at what happens when we bring our item smaller, so our menu is collapsed into a hamburger menu, and the image, so what we used to have some information here, is also collapsed down, and the information winds up below. But you can see with the image itself, the layout is changing. So it's horizontal in this instance, and as we move in, it becomes a vertical. And then as we scroll down, we can see our 3 columns became 1 column, and our 2-column area became 1 column, and so forth. Same with Nate. We can take a look at how they have the page set up. And then as we come in, the image itself actually changes and it's smaller. We have down to 1 column again. And then McEwen, this is a bit of an odd, they're not quite made it there for having responsive web design. So if we scroll down, we have a 4-column down here. So at the top here, their image does resize. This is not looking so good, but you can see that the rest of the page is not responsive, which is odd. Yeah, so that's an example at the bottom here of what non-responsive design looks like. But if I come into another area, they've obviously started changing their design on pages so that it is more responsive. If I come in and shrink this down, it becomes 1 column. So this is much more close to what we're supposed to have for responsive web design. One thing to note with what McEwen has done here with their image to be responsive, so we can see that as the browser moves to a size that's more towards the phone, that this right-hand side gets cut off, and the person on the left is what's shown in the end. So a little bit different from what we saw with the U of A website on how they handle their responsive images. There we go. All right, so reconfigure responsive images, reconfigure the layout based on the website or the social media platform. You want to avoid tiny type on the web. It's more difficult to see on screen. Larger typefaces help for reading and legibility as well. Really thin typefaces can get lost. The screen is putting out light, and that light can sort of eat into very delicate serifs or very delicate typefaces. And across, websites and social media platforms, you want to have a similar look and feel. Obviously, we know about this for branding. So just an example here, we have similar imagery for a poster versus what was seen in a Facebook event. And we can see that, they're not using any tiny type from their poster. They're sticking to larger type. Sorry. All right, so how are images handled on a website or on our social media platforms? And that's dependent on how the website is designed. So for example, our comparison of the U of A one to the MacEwan one and how it handles those feature hero images at the top. Often websites are in content management systems such as WordPress or Squarespace, and so depending on the template you've selected, images will be handled responsively differently. So you'll need to take a look at how they're handled before you commit to a template. And if you're designing the website and you have someone building it out for you, then you can specify how it's handled. So, and I'll talk about those different ways to handle images responsibly. And then for social media, they decide how images are handled responsibly on their platforms. So the ways in which you can define how images respond when on different devices and different browser sizes. 3 ways: scaling, a safe area, and multiple layouts. So I will go into those 3. So with the U of A website, scaling. So we can see here that the image is larger on desktop compared to tablet, compared to phone, and it resizes in proportion. So you need to know the maximum width and height that the image can be before you go ahead. Safe area. So that's what we saw with the MacEwan one, and here I have a bad example with the Nate one. Ensure the image will work when cropped. Define a safe area where important information resides and the periphery contains no important information. So in this example, which is poor, as the image resizes, we just wind up getting the baseball cap in the end. So they didn't really define a safe area where the design or the way that the website is built should focus on. So we would have preferred to maybe get a sliver of his face as opposed to just the ball cap. So again, what to avoid. So here they haven't defined a safe area, or they have somewhat, in that this person is not blurred out, and so when we see it in a smaller size, they look correct. But their little logo here does get cut off. But here's a nice example for Built from a few years ago, where Built, the logo, is sitting in a safe area, and then on the left and the right, those areas can get cut off, no information is lost, and everything is fine. As you can see with the Facebook version. And then you can have multiple layouts, so you actually could build 3 separate images. So one image for desktop, an image for tablet, and an image for phone. 3 separate images. Those images would be called in based on the device and the browser size. So for example, here we can see sort of the football and the structure behind it. On tablet, the structure is hidden behind the football, and then on phone, the structure is above the football. So 3 different options based on, or 3 different image layouts based on what's happening with the browser and the device. So for social media, the file types you can use for Facebook is JPEG and PNG, same with Instagram. So they're pixel-based, and you can't use SVG or TIFF. And since social media have prescribed sizes, you'll need to create multiple layouts for the different social media. So obviously Instagram is a square and Facebook is more horizontal running. And you want to avoid something like what's happened here where the image cuts off the person's head. So we always want to think about how that image is going to work. So the sizes for social media images are always changing. They do redesigns all the time. And so I've given you some links here, and I'll give you these slides so that you have these links. So I've given you some links here to check on what is the up-to-date social media sizes. And I always check multiple sources just to see who's got the most up-to-date information. So I'll take a look at these. So this is the first one from Sprout Social. It's kind of nice to use these web pages with all the information together as opposed to going to each of the social media websites and checking their specs. But I also recommend checking their specs yourself. But it's kind of nice because they give a little diagram as to what they're talking about for the image, and you can see all of the different options. It's a little bit crazy. And then this one's Instagram. Great. The second one I gave you is similar, but I think it's a little bit out of date. Or the first one I gave you is more recent information, but the diagrams might be easier to follow along. And then it's the third one. Great. So you can take a look at those. And maybe keep the links so that you have them for the next time you're doing social media. It's always good to check to make sure that the sizes haven't changed because they've done a redesign. All right, so Facebook ad, 1200 by 628 pixels as JPEG or PNG. And their method of dealing with responsiveness is to scale the images. And a little tip that Facebook gives us is we found that images with less than 20% text perform better. So more imagey images perform better with users. And then I've given you the link, direct link to their specs for their ads. Because it's always good to check the source. And they give quite a bit of information, detailed information on what the technical requirements are. And I've also given you the link, which you'll see in the next slide, to the one for Instagram. So your Instagram post is 1200 by 1200. They also deal with images through scaling. And there's the link that I've given you. So you'll have an image, you'll need to export as PNG or JPEG for your social media. So when starting off, if you're building for web, File, New, Web is the path that you can use to start off a file. And then to export, File, Export, Export As gives you these screens. And then under Format, you can select JPEG. And you want to make sure that it's sRGB. And then for PNG, same idea, you want it to convert to sRGB. Actually, hopefully your color settings are already in sRGB, but you want to make sure that everything continues to be in sRGB. And then for Illustrator, again, you can start off your file, File, New, Web. And then to export is File, Export, Export for screens. And then this is the interface that you get. You get different interfaces for all the software. And under formats, you can choose PNG, JPEG 100. There's also JPEG 80, JPEG 60, that's indicating the quality. So JPEG 100 is 100%, or the highest quality. JPEG 80 is 80%, which is less quality. And that way you can figure out file size. So you want a smaller file size, but you also want to keep a good quality image. You don't want it to become pixelated. So you can sort of strike that balance. So maybe JPEG 80 works just fine, your image still looks good, but you get a smaller file size, and that works out well for the user. And then for InDesign, again, File, New, Web, and then File, Export, and then you can choose PNG or JPEG, and then you get these screens. So your resolution 72, and if you've started off your File, New, Web, and selected from Web, it's going to have a resolution of 72 ppi anyways. And then your color space is sRGB. If you need a transparent background, you want to make sure that's checked, because PNG can do transparent backgrounds. And then JPEG, again 72, RGB, but of course it can't do transparent backgrounds, so that's not one of your options here. Alright, so that's all I had to talk about with you today. Thanks for watching, and you'll have access to these slides. Thanks.